Welcome to the Inspired Podcast. We've been diving deep into the new Soulslike AI limit. We say this game is sparking some serious debate in the community. Today, we're not just skimming the surface. We're going to unpack what the critics and players are saying about AI limit. It's part of the China Hero Project, aiming to boost AAA Chinese development. Now, we know you want to gain knowledge quickly, but thoroughly. So we've synthesized a stack of reviews and gameplay experiences to give you those essential insights. The mission for this deep dive, to understand, is AI Limit a worthy addition to the Souls-like genre? Or does it stumble despite its ambitions? We'll explore the core gameplay, world design, story, presentation, and that all-important issue of bugs. We'll be drawing from sources like Fighting Cowboy's review and the broader critical consensus. So let's jump right in.
Let's talk gameplay mechanics.
Okay.
Fighting Cowboy, he highlighted those familiar Souls-like elements, but he drew an interesting parallel to Wolong because of one key difference. No traditional stamina system. Instead, they've got this thing called the sync bar.
We say that's a fundamental shift.
Right.
It changes the whole feel of the combat. Instead of constantly managing your stamina, you're encouraged to be relentlessly offensive.
Yeah.
As you land attacks, that sync bar fills up, and that becomes the fuel for your special abilities. Spells and weapon skills. Fighting Cowboy noted this really frees up your movement, allows for more frequent dodging.
It's a core design decision. It fundamentally alters the combat loop. The risk and reward encourages you to be aggressive, keeps you constantly moving. It frees you from those strategic pauses that you often see in other Souls-likes. The ones dictated by stamina management.
And it's not just about attacking.
Right.
Defensively, you've got options. You can parry, use a shield. There's even a perfect dodge that leaves behind a damaging clone.
Yeah, that gives you a lot of flexibility in how you approach encounters.
Right. I mean, some players might love that high-risk, high-reward style of parrying. Others might prefer that consistent defense of a shield. Or maybe the evasiveness of the perfect dodge. It caters to different playstyles.
Absolutely.
No, we think this do damage to do more damage concept, the one driven by that sync meter, is central to the game's combat flow. It really pushes you to stay on the offensive. You got to unleash those powerful specials.
Precisely. So you're actively engaging, you're dealing damage, you're directly rewarded with the means to execute more potent attacks. Creates a positive feedback loop. Really incentivizes aggression.
However, even with all these aggressive options, Fighting Cowboy actually found the game surprisingly easy. Often defeating bosses in just 1 or 2 attempts.
Interesting.
This raises a question about the challenge, right?
It does.
I mean, how challenging can a Souls-like be if you're beating bosses that quickly?
Well, he attributed this lower difficulty to the very low enemy stagger thresholds. It allowed him, and presumably others, to lock down even those boss encounters, just with repeated attacks, special moves, especially early on when you have weapons like the polearm. If you can consistently interrupt and stagger enemies, especially bosses, it can really diminish the challenge. And that sense of accomplishment that you usually get from overcoming those tough encounters.
Right, that feeling of, I did it.
Exactly.
He did mention one extremely good offensive ability.
Yeah, what was that?
Consumes a bit of your health for a status boost.
Okay.
Enables those red, piercing damage attacks. He found it particularly effective when paired with timed parries against bosses.
Oh, so a bit of a glass cannon approach.
Yeah, sounds like a tempting tactic for those aggressive players out there.
Sacrifice some survivability for that increased offensive power.
Right.
If you can execute it with precision, it could be a viable strategy.
Trading health for damage.
Exactly.
Now, Fighting Cowboy did point out a limitation. Only one spell can be equipped at a time. Alongside, of course, your 2 weapon slots and buffs. For players who enjoy a more varied approach to combat, like us, Boogle, we think that could feel a bit restrictive.
I can see that.
It limits your options.
That restriction on spell slots could really impact build diversity and tactical flexibility. In a lot of Souls-likes, having that wider array of spells at your disposal allows for more adaptable strategies.
Makes sense.
Depending on the situation you're facing.
Now, IGN, they echoed the sentiment about rewarding aggression. They specifically mentioned the sync rate combat system. Builds as you deal damage, drains when you're hit. So that core philosophy of offense seems pretty consistent across different perspectives. The underlying design definitely encourages an aggressive playstyle.
Right, which is interesting, right? Because it's a deviation from that more cautious approach that's favored in some other Souls-likes.
Yeah. But of course, the effectiveness of that approach really depends on the balance.
Exactly.
How easily can you stagger enemies? How powerful are your offensive capabilities?
All those factors come into play.
Vice went even further.
Did they?
They actually suggested that the absence of a stamina bar leads to this free-flowing combat that feels liberating, potentially positioning AI Limit as the most accessible Souls-like.
Wow, that's a bold statement.
Considering the genre's reputation for difficulty, we think that's significant.
It is.
It lowers the barrier to entry.
Yeah, no stamina management to worry about.
Exactly.
It really makes the game more approachable for newcomers.
The focus shifts,
Yeah.
right? It's less about managing your resources and more about timing, positioning, understanding those enemy attack patterns.
Makes sense.
But then OpenCritic kind of temper that accessibility angle.
Does it?
They highlight the deep combat,
Yeah.
but then immediately note that overpowered parry mechanics trivialize fights. So while the systems themselves might offer depth, we say the balance could be significantly off, potentially rendering some of those nuances irrelevant.
That's a good point. If a specific mechanic is too powerful, too easy to exploit, like that parry system, it can undermine the challenge, make you feel like you don't need to engage with other combat options.
Right, exactly. Let's move on to world design and exploration.
Sure.
Fightin' Cowboy appreciated the verticality of the world.
Ah, a classic Souls-like element.
Secrets hidden on different levels, requiring you to drop down or find those hidden platforms.
Yeah, that sense of discovery is always a plus.
We love it.
It adds another layer to exploration, rewards those observant players.
The ones who think outside the box.
Yeah, the ones willing to go beyond the beaten path.
But his praise for the verticality was overshadowed by his criticism of the significant recursion in the world design.
Whoa.
He found himself repeatedly returning to the same main zones, the sewers, the canyon areas. It led to a sense of déjà vu. And that really undercuts the excitement of exploration.
I agree.
You don't want to feel like you're just retreading the same ground over and over again.
It can lead to player fatigue and a diminished sense of wonder.
That's right. You lose that feeling of what's around the next corner.
Exactly.
He did acknowledge that there were some well-designed layouts in specific areas, and that they used verticality cleverly to hide loot. He gave examples of reaching previously seen items through these intricate pathways.
So, some flashes of brilliance within a somewhat repetitive structure.
That's a good way to put it.
It happens, Moments of inspired design, even when the overall structure has its weaknesses.
Yeah.
But those moments might not be enough to fully compensate for more fundamental issues.
Right. And it wasn't just him. Player consensus on Reddit and Scheme echoed this sentiment.
Really?
Some describing the level design as derivative.
Ouch.
Some even went so far as to call them gray asset flip environments.
That's harsh.
We think it speaks volumes.
It does.
It suggests a broader issue with the environments. They lack distinctiveness. Maybe they rely too heavily on reused assets, which can detract from that feeling of exploring a unique and cohesive world.
I see.
For those enjoying our deep dive, don't forget to like and subscribe for more insightful analysis. Now, moving on to the story and narrative.
All right.
This sounds like a major disappointment for Fightin' Cowboy.
Was it?
He found the overarching narrative, the one about AI taking over after humanity's extinction, unclear.
Even after finishing the game?
Even after finishing the game.
Yeah.
He mentioned endgame revelations that actually contradicted his earlier understanding,
Oh, yeah.
leading to a loss of interest. We say a compelling narrative is so crucial for immersion.
Absolutely.
A disjointed or confusing narrative, it can really undermine the whole experience.
Especially in a genre where lore and environmental storytelling are so important.
Right.
They often contribute significantly to player motivation and engagement.
He noted that the game uses that typical Souls-like approach of storytelling, through notes and environmental details. While familiar to genre veterans like us, it seems the execution fell short.
In terms of clarity and coherence.
That's
a shame. The effectiveness of environmental storytelling, it really relies on players being able to piece together those narrative threads in a logical and satisfying way.
Yeah.
If those threads are too obscure or contradictory, it leads to confusion rather than that aha moment.
That sense of discovery.
Exactly.
Now, he did find the NPC quest lines mostly entertaining.
At least there's that.
Which is a plus. But he felt the main story was disjointed, with these narrative dumps from NPCs. Sounds like the balance between indirect and direct storytelling wasn't quite right.
Striking that balance is key. While environmental details enrich the world, those clear and engaging NPC interactions, they provide essential context, drive the main narrative forward effectively.
His advice, don't expect a compelling story.
Oh.
Pretty clear warning.
Sets a clear expectation. Suggests that the game's strengths lie elsewhere.
The Aesthetic Gaming Show script also mentioned these procedurally generated dungeons. They can feel jarringly incoherent, lacking that lore connection between the different environments.
It further reinforces that idea of a fragmented world.
Yeah.
Using procedural generation. It can increase replayability, sure, but it can sometimes come at the cost of narrative coherence and that strong sense of place.
Moving on to graphics and audio.
Right.
Fightin' Cowboy described the graphics as anime stylized, reminiscent of Code Vein, which he found acceptable.
Okay.
Textures were simple in some areas, but he noted decent detail in others.
So visually, it sounds like it has its moments.
Yeah, but not pushing any boundaries.
More of a stylistic choice than a focus on graphical power.
Right. A consistent art style can still be appealing, even without those cutting-edge technical features.
Agreed.
However, the audio seems to have been a significant issue.
Uh-oh.
He encountered major audio bugs, including complete loss of ambient sounds.
No way.
Even during boss fights.
That's right.
Requiring a reboot.
That level of instability can really pull you out of the experience.
It's jarring. You're in the middle of this intense fight, and suddenly, silence.
It impacts immersion. And gameplay. Sound cues are important,
Yeah.
for reacting to enemy actions.
To know what's going on around you.
Exactly. Having to constantly restart because of audio issues, that's a significant technical flaw.
He also found the boss music generally unmemorable.
Oh.
It failed to reach those epic standards set by other Soulslikes. We say the soundtrack plays a crucial role in those encounters.
It does.
Memorable music, it can really heighten the atmosphere, make those fights feel even more impactful.
Agreed.
Now, while he found the sound effects decent overall, he felt they lacked weight. He even described weapon hits as sounding like slap, slap, slap. But he did say spell sounds were satisfying.
So, another area of inconsistency.
It seems so.
That inconsistency in sound design can affect the overall feel of combat, make some actions feel more impactful than others.
Right.
When it should feel like every attack has weight.
Overall, Fightin' Cowboy deemed the audio very, very average, even putting those technical issues aside.
Not fundamentally broken, but not a standout strength either.
Right. The Aesthetic Gaming Show script offered a different perspective.
Seen such a large-scale
They praised the
necro-invasion
stunning
before.
AI art direction,
Interesting.
describing neon-drenched cyber temples and biomechanical horrors.
Okay, that sounds pretty cool.
They also
Is this
highlighted the
place?
strong synthwave soundtrack.
All right, so a more positive take on the presentation.
However, they did note the uncanny AI voice acting with monotone NPC dialogue.
So it's a mixed bag.
It seems so. It highlights the subjective nature of artistic preferences.
Right. But one person finds stunning, another might find underwhelming.
Exactly. Some might be drawn to that visual style in music, while others might be more critical of things like voice acting quality.
It all comes down to personal taste.
Let's circle back to difficulty. It's been a major talking point. Fightin' Cowboy repeatedly emphasized the game's general ease, with only a few bosses posing a real challenge. He even played a significant portion with limited healing, and it didn't really impact his experience.
For seasoned Souls-like players, that lack of challenge can be a serious concern.
Right. We expect a certain level of difficulty.
It's a core expectation and a primary source of satisfaction.
That feeling of overcoming a tough obstacle.
Exactly.
If that's missing, it diminishes the appeal.
Absolutely.
IGN was even more blunt.
Were they?
They called the bosses laughably easy.
Wow. That's a pretty damning assessment.
It suggests the game might not provide that demanding and rewarding combat experience that fans of the genre typically seek.
Right, you want to feel like you've earned your victories.
Exactly.
Now, Vice offered a contrasting view.
Did they?
They suggested that the boss fights are challenging but forgiving. And they highlighted the fact that there's no corpse running for lost XP.
They posited that this makes the game suitable for newcomers, but potentially too easy for veterans.
So they see the accessibility as a deliberate design choice.
Yep.
but one that could alienate more experienced players.
Right? It's a trade-off.
Between welcoming new players and satisfying those who crave that classic Souls-like experience.
Exactly.
By lowering the difficulty and removing some of those punishing mechanics, the game might appeal to a wider audience, but it could also disappoint those seeking a more traditional challenge.
OpenCritic reiterated that balance issue, stating that overpowered parry mechanics trivialize fights, further explaining that potentially lower than intended difficulty.
Again, the balancing of specific mechanics seems to be a key factor here.
Yeah.
It influences the overall difficulty and potentially undermines the intended combat experience.
The Aesthetic Gaming Show mentioned these claims of revolutionary difficulty, where AI enemies supposedly adapt to player styles.
Interesting.
But Fightin' Cowboy's experience seemed to contradict this.
Did it?
He didn't consistently encounter that challenging AI adaptation.
That's a significant disconnect between promise and reality.
Right.
Can lead to player disappointment.
If the advertised features don't actually materialize in a meaningful way.
Exactly. Players expect those features to deliver on their promises.
Now, let's talk about the bugs and performance.
All right.
Fightin' Cowboy detailed several egregious issues.
Oh, no.
That aggressive screen shaking,
Yeah.
causing the camera to clip underground. That sounds absolutely game-breaking.
Especially during combat.
Imagine trying to fight while the camera's going haywire.
Yeah, that kind of persistent visual glitch can be incredibly disruptive. It hinders the player's ability to control their character and react to the game world.
And then there's that audio bug that completely removes all ambient sound, requiring a reboot. Major immersion killer.
Loss of audio can really break immersion and can also remove those important gameplay cues, putting the player at a disadvantage.
But the worst bug he described was near the end of the game.
What happened?
The world failed to load in the final boss area,
No.
causing repeated deaths and loss of in-game currency.
That's terrible.
He actually had to revalidate his game files to fix it.
That's the kind of bug that can completely halt progress.
It's frustrating.
It can lead to players losing their progress, all that hard work,
Right.
and their valuable resources.
He also mentioned a frustrating area with suicidal drops and narrow beams, which, while a design choice, really detracted from his experience.
It's true. Sometimes even intended difficulty can feel unfair.
It shouldn't be about cheap tricks.
Right.
It should be about challenging enemy encounters and intricate level design.
Exactly.
IGN also explicitly mentioned frequent crashes and bugs, including falling through floors mid-fight. These kinds of stability issues are just unacceptable in a finished product.
They can completely break the flow of gameplay, erode player trust in the game's technical integrity.
You just want the game to work as intended.
Exactly.
The Aesthetic Gaming Show highlighted performance problems on PS5, frame drops during boss fights, and shader compilation stutters on PC.
So it sounds like performance issues are widespread across platforms.
It seems that way.
It can really detract from the enjoyment of a game, no matter how good the other aspects might be.
Now, briefly, on length and price, Fightin' Cowboy finished his first playthrough in about 13.5 hours. He estimated 25-30 hours for completionists, and he felt the $35 price tag was fair. However, IGN called it 30 hours of mediocrity, highlighting those differing opinions on the overall experience.
Yeah, playtime alone doesn't guarantee a positive experience.
Right.
You can spend a lot of time with a game and still walk away feeling disappointed.
So based on these sources, we've got a complex picture of AI limit. We think the ambition is there, they're trying to innovate within the Souls-like framework, but the execution seems to be a major point of contention. Those innovative combat mechanics, that striking aesthetic, they're definitely drawing some attention. But those consistent issues with difficulty balancing, and crucially, the bugs, they appear to be significant hurdles. The question remains, is the promise of a fresh take on the genre enough to overlook these flaws?
That's a tough one.
For those of you seeking knowledge quickly but thoroughly, we hope this breakdown has been insightful. We've given you a clear overview of what AI Limit has to offer, and perhaps where it falls short. What stands out to you most? Are those innovative combat ideas enough to pique your interest, despite the reported technical problems and the ease of difficulty?
It's a balancing act. The allure of innovation versus the frustration of technical shortcomings and design imbalances.
This is definitely a game that sparks more questions the deeper you go. Thank you for diving deep with us into AI Limit on the Inspired Podcast. If you found this analysis insightful, be sure to like and subscribe for more in-depth explorations of the games capturing our attention. Now consider this. With the mixed reception and those significant technical issues, how much polish is truly necessary for an innovative game to be considered a success? especially in such a crowded genre. It's a thought to carry with you. Thank you for listening to the Inspired Podcast.